Hi, welcome to the first round of breakout sessions. My name's Mika Krachinsky. I'm founder, brewer at Strangebird in Rochester. So I'm on the New York State Brewers Association board. And I'm here to welcome you guys to hear Jessie Smith speak. She's principal scientist at Queen City Quality. And I just want to quickly offer a thought, like what are we without our brands? They're the face of our companies. Ensuring the public has a good experience when engaging with our brands requires a keen focus on quality management. And Jessie is here to help. Jessie Smith is a biochemist who started her career brewing at Houston's St. Arnold Brewery, where she focused on yeast health and propagation. While at St. Arnold, she developed and ran their sensory panel. She then became the quality manager at Single Cut Beersmiths in Clifton Park, New York, ensuring the quality of both single cut and contract beers from multiple brands. She is currently the owner of Queen City Quality, a lab testing service designed with New York State breweries in mind. Jessie's also working very closely with Community Beer Works as of very recent. This is a very recent happening. So on a personal level, I have hired Jessie to come in and administer sensory analysis spike training to my team at Strangebird. Jessie commanded the session with professionalism and clarity. I can recommend her services, and I would encourage everyone to listen carefully and take detailed notes because she knows her stuff. Without any further ado, here's Jessie Smith.
Thank you for that introduction. Okay, thank you all for being here. How are we feeling so far? First session, happy to be here. Love it. So for this one, we're going to talk about starting up your sensory panel. I want to keep it interactive, so if you guys have questions throughout, just throw them at me. We'll keep this a pretty casual conversation, but we will go through a lot of detail on what you can do to start up your sensory panel. So, just a little bit of background about me. Why am I talking to you about sensory? What do I know? Level 2 Cicerone. I've been working in the brewing industry for 10 years now, so I've been refining my sensory craft, and sensory is a practice, so you're always constantly trying to make it better and learn new off flavors, things like that. So, as we said in the intro, I ran a sensory panel at a mid-sized brewery. And as well, I run sensory trainings with breweries all over the country. And then a more recent aspect of my sensory training, I've been doing beer judging, which is actually really fun. So when we do the competition award ceremony, we'll get to see some of the stuff that we all judged for the New York State competition. So I'm super excited to see who won what for that. Okay, so what is a sensory panel? This is just a group of people that are trained to evaluate a product. So this doesn't just apply to the brewing industry. This could be any food. Any product, you're going to have to evaluate this. And when it comes to food, beverages, it's a sensory aspect, along with other quality tests. So it's usually made up of employees of a brewery to evaluate their beers. And there's a lot of different training techniques that can be used to help employees practice their sensory skills. As I said, it's a practice, so you're always refining, trying to make it better, and also trying to add new people in, which we'll talk about in a bit. Always trying to enhance your skills, sensory requires practice, and building off of previous lessons, all that stuff. So what's the importance of a sensory panel? Before I go any further, who has a sensory panel that they're running at their brewery? Okay. We're going to have more by the end of this, I hope. So the importance of a sensory panel. You're getting your panel members to become familiar with off flavors that can show up in beer. That's one of the aspects of it. With any brewery that has a tap room, your front of house employees are the last line of defense when serving beer in the tap room. So they're the last person that can try that beer before serving it to the customer. Worst case scenario is a customer sends a beer back because they get diacetyl in it and the taproom employee didn't pick that up. That's not a really good scenario to have. So training those front of house employees on those off flavors is pretty crucial. Also training employees on the brands. So this applies to the taproom employees, especially when they're serving beer to a customer, that they know the brand inside and out and they can describe it, They know what hops are in it, and they can suggest beers to the customers better based on what the customer usually likes to drink. On the production side, doing a sensory panel and having trained employees, you can catch issues before an expensive dry hop or expensive packaging materials. Trying to catch these issues before you package can prevent a recall, which is very costly financially, but also to your reputation. So doing these sensory checks throughout the production process can save you money and issues in the long run. So having people trained in those steps is pretty crucial. And then your employees that are your sensory panel members can become an asset out in the market. So let's say I work at a brewery and I go try a beer and it's on draft somewhere and it's diacetyl. I'm getting butter. I'm going to tell the sales rep for that account and say, hey, maybe go check on that. They might not be cleaning their lines. We thought it was good when it left the brewery, but something's happening with this beer. So then they become an asset out in the market that can check up on your beers. All right. Who should have a sensory panel? Everybody. That too, yep. Craft beer bars, that's a really good point. They should be trained on off flavors, things like that, because they're serving craft beer, so they should know it as well. But in this case, we're talking mostly about breweries. So yes, every single brewery should have a sensory panel. Doesn't matter what size you are. If it's you and your husband or wife, you're the only people running the show, you have a sensory panel. You have the two of you that are able to test this beer and get different opinions on it. So in any scenario, if you're releasing beer, you need to have multiple employees checking on this beer, no matter how many employees you do have. Even before you open, if you're brewing planning, you want to get opinions from people that you trust. This can be a little tricky. Sometimes your bros are like, yeah, your beer's great. It's always great. But you want to get people that maybe know what they're talking about. Know craft beer, maybe know some off flavors. If you're newly open, maybe some of the regulars at your bar. So if you don't have a really robust sensory panel, you can kind of outsource from other places, people that you trust. Any questions so far? Pretty straightforward? Okay. Now we get into a little bit where things get a little trickier for breweries. So who's going to run your sensory panel? Best case scenario, you'd like someone with a science background. Just because running a panel, there's a lot of data entry and analysis in that. So if they already have that background, it kind of helps with that. And then also being able to explain some of the chemical compounds, things like that. So if someone's interested in science and wants to run with it, this could be a good option for them. It also helps to have someone with a flexible schedule because you're going to be doing a lot of planning with the sensory panel. So in the, I have on the last point here, you might not want it to be a brewer who's like, oh, I can't do panel this Friday. We added another brew. I've got to go brew that. You want to have it someone that can have a flexible schedule and can commit to the time frame that you set up for your sensory training. You also, it doesn't hurt to have someone that's a leader and kind of has some public speaking abilities. Because with a sensory panel, no matter how often you have it, you're giving a presentation every time. So it helps to have someone that can kind of corral the brewery cats, as we can call them. But someone who's a leader and then can also present these sensory ideas in a clear and concise manner. In addition, with the flexible schedule, you want someone that can dedicate time to planning it. So that's where breweries run into trouble a little bit, where they've got someone who's also doing all these other things. They run out of time, or the sensory panel kind of falls to the wayside. You want to have someone where they can either, maybe it's part-time or their full-time job, where they're dedicating the time and focus to setting up the panel, planning out a calendar, what they're going to be doing, and the analysis of all the data. Because there is quite a bit of, and it's necessary to be analyzing the data, so making sure that's a priority as well. All right, who to invite? Everybody. You want any employee that you have at your brewery, you want to invite and try to include everyone. There could be scenarios where it gets to a point where maybe someone isn't showing up, or anything could happen where you might have to cut someone out. But in general, keeping the very open mindset of everyone's included. Everyone's palate is different. Men versus women, they're very vastly different sensory abilities. So you never know who could be a super sniffer or someone who's totally blind to diacetyl. That way you can figure that out and know, all right, who am I going to take this beer to if I need to have another check on it? With one of the breweries I worked at, there was this really quiet guy in accounting, and he kind of had an interest in the sensory panel. I was like, okay, yeah, come on board. He knew so much about craft beer, and specifically like Belgian styles and, all these funky flavors that not a lot of people are familiar with if they're just starting a sensory panel. So he was a huge asset to us and was just kind of hiding in the crunching numbers in the background. So he was a great find that we had. Again, you never know who could be a super sniffer. And the term is anosmia, when you can't smell certain off flavors. So if that comes up, it's okay, you're not broken, but it's good to know who can't smell. So let's say you're doing a diacetyl test. You take it to a brewer, he's like, I never get diacetyl on this. Well, yeah, because you just can't smell it. So maybe I won't take it to you. Maybe I'll take it to someone else. For me personally, I'm not great at picking up sulfur off flavors. It has to be really in my face. So I'm not the greatest if it's like, hey, can you give this a sniff? See if it's, needs more lagering time, things like that. So they would maybe take it to someone else who's more sensitive to it. Okay, another thing that breweries kind of can come across that can be a hindrance to them is a budget. But I'm going to show you some options that this can be done on the cheap. You can do this, fairly reasonably. You don't have to break the bank. You can start slow. But I'm going to hopefully set it up that it's very approachable. A lot of these tests you can do without having to fork out a bunch of money. Because we know budget is super important for breweries. New breweries, but even existing breweries, you have different priorities for, your raw materials, new brands, things like that. But setting aside a budget for a sensory panel is super important. So I'll get into different off-flavor options, cheap ones versus more expensive, refined ones. You can start small and expand, Again, you don't have to go crazy from the beginning and, maybe get some traction, get some interest in it, and then you can start adding more of a budget to it. And also leaving a budget for some fun things, because it's not fun to just smell off flavors every week. Your breweries and taproom staff are maybe going to get sick of you. So have a, bottle share event, a pizza party, things like that. So leaving in the budget that you can do some kind of fun stuff to break it up a little bit. All right, frequency of the panel. How often should you be doing this? There's no, set rules for this. You can do whatever works best for you. So this can be determined by who's on the panel, but also the panel leader. Whatever frequency works best for them. Let's say you only brew Monday through Wednesday. Okay, we can do Thursdays and Fridays. We've got an active panel, let's do it every week. Or, we don't have a lot of people and we're super busy, let's do once a month. And, we'll still keep it on that Friday or something like that. I like the once a week timeline, because again, you're practicing, you're building off of previous lessons. So you don't want to have it spaced out enough that they're forgetting what they learned in the last lesson. So I like once a week because it's like, oh yeah, we did this last week. Oh wait, now we're doing something a little different, but I can still pull from what I learned last week. It's fresh enough in their minds. And sensory is a lot of a memory exercise. It's, physical, but then also taking into account your, memory and things like that when it comes to remembering off flavors. But once a week might be too much, so once a month can work. Again, it kind of just depends. You can start slow and build as you go and as you get more interest maybe. So the time of day that you want to have your sensory panel, I like an 11 a.m. panel. This is after coffee, before you've had lunch. So the palate has kind of reset at that point. You can have crackers and things like that. I don't mention that in here at all, but really the best way to reset your palate is just time. Some people will sniff coffee beans or whatever. Time is just the best thing. So if you have members on the panel, tell them, hey, we're starting panel at 11, stop drinking coffee at 10 a.m. and maybe just drink water, don't eat snacks or, spicy stuff, so your palate can reset for about an hour. But you can also do an afternoon one, 2 to 3 p.m. So after lunch, before your bucket of shift beers that everyone has, that could be a good window, and it could be a nice way to wrap up the day or the week as well. But again, you're wanting that palate to have time to reset after eating and things like that. Any questions? No? Beautiful. Okay, your location. So breweries have maybe some flexible space. The tricky thing is breweries also maybe have a kitchen or a restaurant. You want to kind of keep those separate. You don't want the food smells to be interacting with the sensory panel space. So you want enough room to be able to set up. In this particular case, we were doing a very collaborative sensory panel. So we were cool with having people sitting close together, sitting across from each other. We wanted them to talk for this one. But in some cases, if I'm doing a wine tasting, I don't want any bias, I don't want people to talk, I might space them out where they'd be every other chair, or separate tables, depending on what I'm kind of using the data for. So you want to have enough room for your panel that you can have the options for doing tests like that. So yeah, spaced out for certain tests. Quiet. A quiet space is ideal. You don't want somewhere where maybe customers are walking through. I had a location where customers were walking through and they're like, oh, hire me, I can do that. And we're like, okay, we're working right now. So you don't want somewhere that people are gonna be, bugging you or saying like, hey, I need you to help me with this. You wanna have it be a quiet, almost a sacred space. And again, the food processing areas, away from the kitchen, kind of away from the tap room if they're setting up for the day. Tap rooms with a popcorn machine, please don't do that. That's just, I don't know why people still do that. But that's like the biggest no-no. Everything smells like diacetyl if you have a popcorn machine in your, sensory room. So let's not do that. Exactly. Okay, physical needs. Again, you can do this, fairly on the cheap. For the true to style glassware, you probably already have some of that in-house. If you're selling things in your tap room, you probably have glassware based on the styles that you have. So you can use those, but you can also get some, more fancier things specifically for the panel. But before that, taster glasses. So it's kind of the little glass in the background. A 5-ounce glass is pretty good for a sensory panel. You don't want people to get wasted, that's not the point of doing a tasting. It's to have just a little bit and, be able to evaluate that. So that's good for off flavors. Some of the other tests I'll get into, triangle tests, that size is good. I also like black plastic cups. This is a very specific one. And we'll talk about brand recognition, but the black plastic cups make it so you can't see the color or even the foam color sometimes. So that way you don't know what the beer is, and that's kind of a fun way to see like, okay, do you know these brands? And that can also create a little competition among the panel members, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So that's pretty much the glassware that you can work with. Placemats, I like to, set these up based on the tests I have and laminate them because you're gonna spill beer. It's gonna be messy. So that way you can kind of clean them off and reuse them. But you can also just print them out every time depending on what you're doing. And then I like having a physical written worksheet. Again, this is a memory, sensory aspect for me, writing and tasting. It kind of solidifies it for me. So I like having that. And then as a data entry standpoint, I like to have a physical copy as well as a digital one. So, but again, that's up to you. You can do it all digital. Things like Draft Lab, there's software out there that you can do it all through, Google Forms, things like that. So it's up to you. But that's pretty much it for the physical needs. It's nothing too crazy. With the taster glasses, that might be, depending on which test you're doing, you might want to add more to your stock at a certain point. But again, you can start slow and grow. Any questions on these? Yep.
Do you have suggestions as far as worksheets go, like must-haves versus who would set excessive?
I'll kind of try to go into that with the different tests to run. I think keeping it simple. You want to have the date, initials, and then depending on the test, you might want to have the brand name and things like that, batch numbers, just whatever you need to, collect the data and keep it, but you don't need too much for them to get kind of...
Too much discouraged.
Yes. Exactly. And to have really clear instructions on them, depending on some of these tests, to explain the instructions, but then also have it written on there. But yes, I am a proponent of clean, simple, where they can just sit and focus on, the test they're doing. Okay, so our tests to run, I've got the list here, but I'm going to go through all these individually. We got off flavors, brand recognition, real life sensory, triangle tests, threshold training, style training, and raw materials. I'd say maybe 2 or 3. I'd say probably 3 of these are kind of more intense. The other ones you could do at any time, and they're pretty on the cheap. So we've got a good balance of things that are, hopefully pretty approachable, and then things you can maybe work towards. All right, so we'll start with our off flavors. This is definitely the one thing I, really want people to be trained on, because then you can see what's showing up in your beer. So common off flavors that can show up in your beer: diacetyl, sulfur, papery, DMS, all those common things that you want to prevent from getting to the packaged product or from being served in the tap room. So for production or even front of house staff, I like to explain to them where these come from, and then for the brewer side, how to prevent them. So then they can kind of start thinking critically, okay, what is this? All right, I got diacetyl. All right, it's diacetyl, but I'm not getting anything sour. Okay, so maybe it's probably not from the tap lines. All right, maybe my diacetyl is something, fermentation side. So then being able to put that together. And in that case, I like to have worksheets that have more detail. So it's something that they can keep and take with them, or have it behind the bar and be like, you know what? I think I remember getting this tomato. Oh, it's DMS. Okay, here's, where it's coming from. So that one can be a little more info heavy. And then with doing this off flavor, so like the sensory training I did with Strangebird, where I'm spiking into their own brands. So you could use PBR, Coors Light, something light, but I like to use the brewery's own brand, their lager, pilsner, so then the employees can see what their beer tastes like with diacetyl, or these other off flavors. And then, so I don't go into too much detail on this slide, but you've got a couple options for off flavors. You can do commercial spikes. That's your Aroxa, Siebel, Flavor Active. They can be expensive. That can start to add up. And price per spike can be very expensive. It can be like $15 for a capsule that gets you 1 liter of beer for 12 people. So that might not be super attainable for a starting panel. But another option is grocery store spikes. So imitation butter, McCormick has like a little bottle of that. You can use that. And you can work on that, getting the dosing rate. So when we're doing off flavors, in the beginning you want them to be very high concentration, so people can see, taste them and be like, oh wow, that's really in my face. I picked that up. So yeah, the grocery store spikes, you can kind of tailor it to how much I want, or I want it to be a little more subtle. There's imitation banana for isoamyl acetate, papery, just put cardboard in beer, and it's very effective. It even gets the mouthfeel. It's disgusting. It's awful. What else is there? Cloves. There's a few different options. Vinegar for like an acetic infection. And then if you're doing like a barrel program, you can do acetone, but making sure they're not drinking that sample. But to get that smell, because that's kind of a specific one. So yeah, there's, a handful of options for that. And again, it can get you started with the grocery or with the spikes. Anyone have questions or thoughts on these? How much butter? So not butter, imitation butter. You're not putting a stick of butter in your beer. So yeah, there's different brands, so they might have different concentrations, but I think like a milliliter in a liter of beer is pretty good, making sure it's getting mixed up. But yeah, that's something you can, yes, exactly. And if it's like, whoa, that's way too much, that's like, doesn't compute with what I might find in a beer, you can change it up. So that's where you have to maybe play around with it a little, where the commercial spikes, they have the set, it's above threshold. It's a set thing. You put the capsule or the little, the glass thing in there. So yeah, the grocery store spikes, it's a little more plug and play with that.
As far as like spiking and like doing back-to-back sensory, is there like a limit to how much you should be doing?
Like the number? Yes.
Just do a flavor after flavor.
Yeah.
We got one of the kids, so I don't know if we should bust through the whole thing.
No. I like to do maybe like 5 at a time. 5 is a good, and I don't think I have it here, but the placemat I like to use with off flavors is having a a water glass, because that also kind of helps with your palate, having your control glass, the beer that it's spiked into, and then your 5 off flavors on the placemat. So I like 5. Sometimes I'll do sensory trainings with 10, but I'll give people a break in between. So I'll, clear everything, set up the next 5, and it gives them a little bit, 10, 15 minutes. So that would be the maximum, I would say. But 5 is a pretty good number. But yes, that is a really good point that you're burnt out after this. There's one that I was using, a musty off flavor, like a grandma's wet basement. I don't know if it's super relevant to the beer industry, but it came in one of the Aroxa kits. That lingered. You'd be burping it up hours later. So we always finished with that one. We'd start with, the maybe less common ones or less easy to pick up ones. Sometimes the sulfur can be tricky, DMS can be tricky for people. And then we round it off with that musty or papery because it was lingering. Yes.
In terms of commercial spikes, do you have a preference? I've noticed that in past sensories, they're maybe not all created equal.
No, that's a really good point. I've been talking with people yesterday about this. I have used Aroxa mostly in the past, but I'm starting to move away from them. Cost-wise, I think they're the most expensive per capsule. They do have a 2-year shelf life, which is nice if you keep them refrigerated. Yeah, with all the commercial spikes, keeping them refrigerated helps. I would say Siebel is a really good option. I really hate the little glass things that you have to break. It freaks me out. I don't want someone to swallow glass, but they are very stable, and cost-wise, they're kind of the better option. And they have a really good variety of flavors too. Yeah. Okay. So another test we can do is brand recognition. So this one, being able to recognize your brands inside and out. This goes for production, your sensory panel, your accountants, but then also front of house. This is super important for them. You want your employees to know the brands like the back of their hand, to be able to explain them, and to be able to pick up when things are off or a little bit different. This can also apply to knowing different versions of the brand. Let's say you've got your IPA, and then you've got like a double dry hopped version of it. Them being able to pick out the differences between them and maybe notice the different hops. So again, they can explain that to the customer, and they can just kind of, know those differences. Again, changes they can communicate with the customer. And then I like this almost as a fun panel, doing the brand recognition. Again, you can do it with the black cups so you can't see the color of the beer, but have it be a friendly competition among the panel members and see okay, whoever gets all the brands, you get a prize or something. You get a free, you get a cool beer or something. Exactly, more beer. But yeah, I found it does create some friendly competition, and it kind of makes them want to go drink your beer more and to know it back, like the back of their hand. So this can be a fun kind of looser panel. You need to break things up from all the off flavors. Another one that I've started doing, which I really like, is real life sensory. This again is a very cheap option. I mean, you could do this on the cheap. You could start all your panels with something like this. So fresh fruit, flowers, spices. What does a mango actually taste like? I might say a beer smells like mango, but I'm thinking of the artificial mango from, candy I had as a kid. I'm not maybe describing it the way mango really is. Papaya? I don't know if I could tell you what papaya actually tastes and smells like. So having these fruits and things, different types of citrus, orange peel, orange zest, those different things. It's just a really fun, kind of collaborative panel that you can do. And then floral, geraniol in a real life setting, roses, different flowers, so kind of, grassy, things like that. So being able to, fine tune into the hops a little bit more. And then I also like the option of spices and other adjuncts. So let's say you do your pumpkin spice beer once a year. Let's break it down. What's in there? You got nutmeg, cinnamon, yada yada. Let's break it down and see if we can pick those all out in the beer. But doing this training that, all right, here's what we're putting in it. Let's smell them all together. Okay, now we're getting a little more data heavy with these tests. So the first test is a triangle test. Pretty much one of these things is not like the other. So with your placemat, you would have 3 spots with this one. And it's a way to determine if panel members can pick out what is different. So you'll have your A and B, let's say that's your control beer, that's just your Kolsch, and let's say C is spiked with a lower dosage of diacetyl. See if your panel members can pick that out. So yeah, doing this with off flavors in lower concentrations. It's also good to see if you're doing a change in a recipe. So again, let's say you've got your flagship IPA, but it's getting crazy expensive. Hops are out of control. Your dry hopping rates, when you first made the recipe, you really liked it. Now it's too expensive. What if we dialed back the dry hopping rate or change the hops a little bit to still get those flavors, but save money? See if you can, pick out the difference. Have 2 versions of the old beer and a version of the new beer. If your sensory panel can't pick up the difference between them, the consumer probably isn't going to either. So it's a good way to kind of test out if that's something you're working on. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about this? Any other ways you could use a triangle test? No?
I feel like there's a right answer.
Okay, think on it.
We do triangle tests all the time.
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
And it's an unbiased test. So you're putting it out there, you've got A, B, and C. And this is one where you would do it separating people. So telling them when they walk into the panel room, we're not talking about, what's set up, even like any comments like, whoa, that looks funny, that can sway someone. So this is one where you're, really and afterwards you can all talk about it, but keeping things unbiased. And yes, that's the whole point of this test.
And we use it as far as like A coats and how
Yep.
old beer is.
Yes.
Fresh one.
Yep.
Semi-fresh one.
Yes.
You can get a lot out of those triangle tests.
Yeah, that made me think of another one. You can do force aging beers, putting them in an incubator at like 100 something Fahrenheit for a week. That'll simulate 3 months on the shelf.
Throw them in the boiler room.
Yes. Yeah, so you can do that and compare it to an actual 3-month shelf life beer. So that'll tell you if that force aging process is, actually simulating those 3 months. But yeah, I like that for the aged beer, being able to pick up those differences, because sometimes they might be pretty subtle. Other times it might be your, IPA and it's super papery, but there might be subtle changes. So yeah, that's good.
Because you get a real feel of what the consumers are getting.
Yes. Yep.
Have your sales reps go out and,
Yes.
and all that, see how old the beers are.
And depending on like the location of the beer, the gas station beers probably aren't being stored, or their temperatures might be fluctuating more than you would be in your tap room. In your tap room, you're keeping them cold. But it's a gas station, it's like, they might not care. So yes, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so our other data heavy, and then this one's like the next level. So threshold training. So this is good for off-flavor detections and seeing the level that people can pick up. So like for this example, it would be 3 separate triangle tests. So your first one over on the left there, that would be the lowest concentration. You'd have that like pretty far below human threshold. And you would spike one of the beers with your off flavor. In this case, diacetyl is a really good one to see who can pick it up at which level. So then your middle one, it would be at human threshold. So again, you're spiking one, having 2 as the control, and then your last column, you have one that's super high concentration. And you can do this in sets of 3, you can do it in sets of 5, depends on how many panel members you have. But the thing is with this, it's a lot of setup time. It's 3 to 5 separate triangle tests. So you have glassware for that, for each panel member, and it involves a lot of beer. So you need the controls, you need the spiked beer. And then also with this, you want to degas the beer. Not ideal for most sensory trainings, but for this one, and especially if you're looking for diacetyl, it doesn't matter if the carbonation's there, but you want to degas it so that your spiked beer might have a lower, head retention, because you've spiked it, maybe stirred it up. Your controlled beers are super fresh, good head retention. So you might be visually able to see a difference, and also in mouthfeel. So degassing all of the beer, it's all at the same level, same temperature, harder to, find those, find those differences. So yeah, I like using this for diacetyl, especially with brewers. If I'm starting out somewhere, I'm like, all right, who's my super sniffers? Or who's like, oh, I think I picked it up in the, last column. Like, yeah, okay, good, you should, but you're not smelling my diacetyl today. So knowing who's picking it up where is a good one. And then also with sulfur, I think that's, me specifically, I'm not good at sulfur. So finding who's your super sniffer. But again, it takes a long time and it's data entry, things like that. Okay, style training. Again, this is kind of a, potentially fun one or more laid back, but there's still a lot of good information that you can get from this. So doing a deep dive into style parameters. What is a Kolsch? What is the, BJCP guidelines for a Kolsch? ABV, IBU, color, all of those things. Really, breaking it down to its essence. And that helps with brand recognition too, knowing those brands and being able to sell it to the customer. So something you can do is compare your brewery's brands to commercial or competition examples. So let's say Strange Bird, they're working on a new brew. They're like, you know what? We're kind of trying to fine tune this recipe. Let's get some of the competition and let's get, really famous commercial examples of this style. And then we can kind of figure out what we really want to put together for our recipe. This is also important when, recipe development, what are judges looking for as being true to style? Because you can knock a beer for, different parameters. So having it be within those style guidelines is important. So I like this style training, especially for brewers and brewers that maybe are doing R&D or recipe development, so that they're knowing, the essence of the beer style that they're trying to make. And again, using those competition commercial examples, they can say, okay, I really like this aspect of this Kolsch. I like this, but I didn't like this about this one. Let's see what they were doing. What can I do with my version of this Kolsch? And then again, with front of house employees, it's good for explaining beer to the customer. This is your double dry hopped IPA. This is what it means. This is what's in it. Things like that. Okay, and I think our last one, raw materials. Again, this one can be pretty cheap, a little more laid back, but super important for your brand recognition and, even just doing sensory before things enter a beer. So hop rubs are a really good option. Hop teas used to be a thing. I'm not a huge fan of them because they get cheesy pretty quickly, so it can kind of overwhelm some of the other flavors. So even if you just have pellets, doing the hop rub, it's a good, physical experience, and then doing the sensory. And then employees can kind of get familiar with the hop varietals that are in your beers. And then also kind of even just the physical, like, oh, it's oily. Okay. Kind of, feeling what hop pellets are actually like. So it's kind of a cool way for them to really dive into that raw material. But then too, all right, we get a, kind of suspicious box of hops. Looks like it's been through some shit. Let's open them and let's smell them. Make sure these are good. They're not oxidized, anything like that. So that's good for, doing those checks before you're brewing. So on the other hand, malt steeps, that's like a malt tea. I do like those a lot. I think there's an ASBC method for it, pretty straightforward. Coffee grinder, a Yeti thermos, and then a certain amount of your base malt, and then if you're doing specialty malt, having the base malt plus a little bit of the specialty, having the right proportions. It's all in that method. But yeah, you're creating a malt tea so you can get the aroma and then also the taste and mouthfeel. So let's say you're using, wheat or something, you can kind of pick up that mouthfeel when you're doing the malt steeps. So again, you're getting a new malt from a new supplier that you've never used before. All right, let's test this out and see, how we feel about it. Do we like it? But then also getting employees familiar with all the different malts that you're using in your brands. Yeast. I love this plate because they're like the cutest little yeast colonies. They're so perfect. So if you have Petri dishes, you can smell the yeast on these Petri dishes. That's one aspect. But just going in the tank farm, they're pulling beer for a slurry, to do a slurry count, smelling that. You can taste it too. It can be useful, but smell enough can be very helpful. If you're getting a sulfur, really strong sulfur note, your yeast might be dead. It might not be healthy. And then different yeast strains that you're using. So, what they impart in the different beers that you have. So kind of getting people familiar with, all right, there's different yeasts, your ale versus lager. What are they bringing to the beer? And then water salts, that's another one you can do. People, I don't know. Water salts, yes, very important, but it's the least sexy of all the raw materials. But still, this is a really easy way to, dose in water salts the way you would for certain brands. And you can taste them and get the mouthfeel that these impart. Another one I thought of later was carbonation. So doing different levels of carbonation just in water so you can see how it feels, and then also like if it's a very high carbonation, that kind of carbonic bite that you might get. So getting people familiar with, all right, we don't want to see that in our beer, or this is a really low level of carbonation. Again, you can do all that in water. Okay, so those are all our tests. Now the data tracking. This is very important still. It's the least fun part, the most mundane, but it is very important. So you're tracking results from each panel member. So the worksheets that we talked about, you're taking that data, you're entering it into, I like Excel, so you can just do Excel spreadsheets. You can do something fancier if you want. It's totally up to you. And also, what other bases that you're using for, your brew sheets, what other data entry you're doing. You can go based off of that. So with this, you want to be tracking data from your panel members to see who's improving between each successive panel. So you want to, and they want to see the improvement too. They want to be able to see that, hey, all right, I did better on threshold this time than I did last time. I'm improving. Or you know what, I'm plateauing, or I'm really bad at this off flavor. I want to work on it more. Or I can never recognize this brand. I should probably drink that a little bit more. So it is nice to be able, you're tracking the data and it helps you learn more about your panel, but then also showing them that they're improving and things like that. So again, it doesn't have to be anything too crazy, but just making sure that you have this. Because what's the point? If you're doing these sensory panels, you're doing the training, you're getting all the experience, but to have this also as another level, it takes your sensory panels to the next level. Okay, so you want to grow your panel. This can be tough, especially if you're a small brewery. If you're a brewery that has a lot of turnover, that can be tough as well. People cycling through. So I like to open a call to members every 6 months or a year. There might be someone that was like, I don't know, I don't want to do sensory panel. And then they see how much fun you're having and the bottle shares and the pizza parties. And they're like, okay, I can do that. Or my schedule opened up. I have some free time for that. Or I just got hired and yes, I'm super into this. Let me join. So opening it up, again, you want to include everyone. So this is a good way to grow your panel. New employees, existing employees that are really interested, and then you have new members available as you're expanding and growing your brewery. You open a tap room, you got a bunch of people that are available for that. So including everyone and kind of always having it be an open call to have people included. So keeping members engaged. I am not above bribery. I'll bribe you to come to my panel, and I know it's tough because you're doing off flavors and it kind of sucks, and it's like Friday, it's like, oh, I can't have a beer yet because I have to do sensory panel. I can't have these tacos that are just sitting there. So I'll be like, you know what, we'll do some fun things. And again, that goes back to your budget in the beginning, saving some room for that fun stuff so that it's not just off flavors and terrible beer and things like that. So snacks, pizza party, doing the real life sensory here and there. So it's like, all right, we're gonna have a day where we're just eating fruit and talking about it. So it's a little more laid back. Having a competitive aspect for the brand recognition, doing some field trips. You have a local malt supplier, see if they'll let you come and, smell the malts, see how they're making everything. Same with hops, go to a hop farm, and then you kind of get a different level of sensory for things like that. So again, keeping it interesting, not just doing off flavors. Do a bottle share, that's really fun. All right, my final takeaways. You just gotta go for it. But the big thing is trying to stay consistent. Having that consistency is key. Having someone that's going to lead this panel and keep it going. You want to get everyone involved. There's really no reason you would want to exclude someone. Anyone can join. Find who your super sniffers are. Tracking your data, compiling things, seeing who's improving. Having a point person be someone that can commit to it. I've seen many sensory panels that are like, I just got so busy with this extra project, and it falls to the wayside quickly. So having someone where it's their priority and they can commit the time to it, and keeping panel members engaged. Again, you're doing off flavors all the time, it's gonna be like, we're doing off flavors again, I'm just gonna skip this one. No, we'll mix it up a little bit. Okay, so my plug, real quick. Let's say this is a lot of info in this, and it might be kind of a lot to start. So if you're not ready to start your panel or you don't have a point person yet, you can hire me to do an off-flavor training or a style training, whatever you're interested in. But the off-flavors are usually a good place to start. It can get some training under your belt. You can kind of see how it works. It can spark interest among your employees, and you can see, okay, people are actually interested in doing this. Maybe we really do have a panel. And you can see that it's really, you need the point person, you need the time, but it's really not that bad once you get started with it. And then if you do have a sensory panel and you're kind of stuck, we can do some consulting options and say like, all right, here's your next step. Here's what you can do. Mix things up a little bit. So just wanted to give you guys those options. Okay, that's it. Any questions?
Great presentation, by the way. But do you have any suggestions for questions or a way to do sensory panel like as fast and down and dirty as possible? Like I created a sensory sheet and the boss immediately was like, hey, it's too much. Like, I did a lot of like what they would do at BJCP for judging here.
Yeah.
I get his point. It's too much. It's going to be 3 guys. Hey, do this way. I'm thinking most of the time, that's what seems to be mostly what we need is, okay, we adjusted this recipe slightly. Which one is better? Old, new, put 2 olds and then new in there, or put 2 news and old in there?
Yep.
Which one is better?
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to think about it. Keeping the worksheet simple, like we were talking about, simple, straightforward, not getting, too messy. BJCP might be too much. Maybe it's just, okay, go or no go, true to brand or not true to brand. That might be what you're looking for. And something I didn't mention in this, like the triangle test, that can take less than, you have your setup time, but for the person coming in to taste it, it can take less than 10 minutes. They can sit down and do it, real quick. You can cycle people in and out. Let's say they're brewing. So I think that is a good, quick and dirty. That test is a really good one. If you don't have the time and if you want to keep it simple, I think that's a really good option.
I'd like to add also, we use DraftLab at Strangebird. DraftLab makes everything pretty easy and straightforward and kind of like how long it's going to take, before you start. So it's just, getting a program that is regular, that, everybody buys into, that's really easy, and reducing the barriers. And I think DraftLab does a good job of reducing the barrier of like some of the setup and kind of like the brain time it takes to like figure out what exactly you want to do with your analysis. So I would look into DraftLab, and yeah, it's an app. It's on everybody's phone. Everybody in our phone in our brewery has it.
And there's some free options and paid ones?
Yes, I think it's like $60 a month or something like that for the paid option for the lowest tier, which is what we do, which we find perfectly fine. And so not only like does everybody have it on their phone, like anybody could start an analysis. Like our sales guy needs like tasting notes on a beer, he can set up a description test. Brewers can, may taste something and may want to start a true to type test. So, it's very flexible, very easy, and I would recommend it.
Yeah, DraftLab's a really good option.
It's also a New York company, too.
Yeah, so if the data analysis side isn't your strong suit, something like DraftLab is a perfect option. Does it all for you. Yes?
So it can be really difficult to coordinate some of this stuff, especially when you're talking about front of house versus brewery. What do you think about actually carving out a time and having everybody in the same space and doing it at the same time versus like multiple locations, sending beer out and saying, hey, draft lab.
Yeah.
What do you think are the advantages or disadvantages to not being in the same physical space?
Yeah, it might depend on the tests that you're doing. Part of it too will be coordinating your time as the panel leader. If you're doing multiple, let's say you're doing a brewery panel and a taproom panel, that's more time for you. But yes, it's whatever works. kind of like you can send people home with homework. So give them a beer where, you know, they don't know the batch number or something like that. It's kind of coded a certain way. Have them go home and taste it. So then they're, you know, they're taking it home with them. So it's kind of continuously going. Only thing is with that, you don't know the setting that they're having that beer in. With having the panel, you know, having it set up, having it in that space, you have the controlled setting. So you know, okay, they're, you know, no one's talking while they're doing this triangle test. If they take a beer home and have it for homework, it's like, oh, his wife's yelling at him. He also just had a taco. Like, he's watching the game. He's kind of amped up. Oh, it's still sitting there. He forgot about it. You know, you kind of have the unknowns with something like that. But it can be a good option, too. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.